Welcome to the What If podcast. We're sharing an ever-growing collection of stories from the Belmont entrepreneur community to inspire you to start and keep going. I'm your host, Elizabeth Gortmaker. Here we go. Hey, Matt.
Hello, how are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Thank you for being here today on our podcast.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. I'm always happy to have conversations like this.
Well, let's just dive right in. You studied entrepreneurship and music business. You graduated in 2011.
I did.
And now you are an awesome entrepreneur.
That's your words, not mine. I definitely consider myself sort of an entrepreneur in training, for sure.
Well, let's tell me about it. Okay, you started Vinyl Me Please. What is Vinyl Me Please?
So I think the easiest way to describe Vinyl Me Please is a record of the month club. The story behind Vinyl Me Please, I think goes way back to when I was like a kid. And I have always been somebody that's been like engrossed with music. It's always been something that's been a huge part of my identity. It was something that I remember my dad and I connecting with or over when I was a young kid. And he plays guitar, had, like one of those dad cover bands that drinks beer and practices in your basement. And I'd be down there in my diaper. It was like Kiss cover songs. And they're great. They're awesome. They put on a good show. But it was all covered. It was just like classic rock type stuff. Some of the current hits at the time and whatever. But I'd be dancing around in my diaper, just running around. The basement was big enough that's where they practiced. So his drummer kept all of his equipment there. I ended up teaching myself how to play drums when I was in elementary school. My dad was also kind of like a techie. So he had like all the first commercially available like home studio recording stuff, so on and so forth. And he also bought one of the first like commercially available CD burners. And that's relevant to this story because he, at the same time, he had like a record collection of many thousands of records that was just collecting dust in our basement. And so he used to pay me like $1 per record to take his LPs and then burn them onto CDs and then eventually put them onto his computer and an MP3 player and all that stuff. So at a very young age, I had like a really formative experience with music, specifically like the tangible representation of music. And but at the same time, the reality is like I'm a product of the Napster generation, right? So like the majority of my interaction with music has been through a screen or a device of some kind. So it's like it's even studying music business at Belmont, it was like that's what that came from, right? And entrepreneurship was another piece of that, where it was like both my parents were fairly entrepreneurial. For me, the idea of working for myself sounded awesome. I didn't really know what that meant sort of objectively at the time, but I wanted to figure it out. And so that's what kind of led me to the entrepreneurship degree. And it's like, I don't know, you look back or you're in the moment, your life feels like a very disconnected series of dots. And then all of a sudden you like look behind, you're like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of sense, right? So where I am today makes so much sense from all of that, just being able to look back at it. So that's like the deep cut origin story of Vinyl Me Please in terms of, where it came from like the essence side of me.
What was this is the What If podcast. So kind of when you started to think about, launching Vinyl Me Please, what was that what if moment?
Yeah, that is such an important question, I think, it's like the basis of entrepreneurial or like the entrepreneur spirit, right? It's like, what if something could be different? What if there was a better way? Or what if there was more people like me? What if there was, whatever, it doesn't matter what kind of follows it. And for us, like the seeds that ultimately became VMP were kind of a confluence of different things. The first was, this was after I graduated. So it was like mid 2012 that we started to think about this, and Spotify had entered the US not long before that. It was like early 2012, late 2011, something like that. And it was amazing because finally we could do legally what we had been doing illegally for a really long time at that point. But at the same time, it was like, as a music fan, it was totally changing the way that I interacted with music, where it shift from like a model of ownership or like identity to like access and just like quantity. Right. And that was incredible because streaming has totally disrupted the way that we share, talk about, discover, engage with music in, I think, ways that generally are net positive. But at the same time, speaking to that identity piece, like there was just something missing there, right? Like it felt weird to be interacting with like albums that like literally feel as a part of me as my left arm, while also like responding to emails and text messages or whatever. And I so longed for that experience that I had when I was a kid, where I had something tangible to sort of reference. I had liner notes, photos, whatever, that just made me feel like I was a part of the band or a part of the story or what have you. And then the other, I think, element of this is like streaming has also disrupted the distribution models, where now, and certainly back then too, like there's more music than ever before being released, right? You physically cannot keep up. It's physically impossible to listen to all the new music. And so it was like, okay, this model is changing. It's generally good. It's not all good. I love music. I can't keep up with how much is being out there. And I'm desperate for this like slow music experience that just doesn't seem to exist. And the what if question was like, what if there are more people like us? What if there are people that want that type of experience in and around music, that care about sort of the depth and the relationship that they have with music, that find like solace and belonging and meaning through music, and sort of the objective experience that streaming provides is just not enough for them? Like, what if there are more people? And for us, it was like, the answer didn't really matter, right? Like it was the question that mattered. And that launched us on the journey that we embarked on, which was, led to us deciding to max out our personal credit cards to launch the thing. We in the first month we had 12 paying customers, which is only 12. So it's not a lot, but we were like through the moon or over the moon at the fact that people were paying us to send them music. And we're like, who are we to be doing this? Like we asked ourselves a question, and it turns out there's at least 12 other people that feel the same way that we do. And so like every time we just kind of cross into the threshold, it's like, there's more people and there's more people and there's more people. And then it was like, oh man, the opportunity that we've stumbled on is way bigger than just, a record of the month club. Like we're shaping a movement. We're kind of the voice for a movement that's happening kind of at a societal level and everything. So that simple question of what if there are more people like us snowballed into something bigger than we ever could have imagined.
So where are you today? How many of those people are there? How many customers do you have?
Oh man, lifetime, I think we've had well over 100,000, probably 200,000 people that at some point have purchased something from VMP. I know we've got like 30 some thousand active subscriptions. We're shipping to 40 plus countries around the world. The other component of our business is subscription is the biggest, but e-commerce is another one. So in total, we're shipping like 50, 60,000 units a month in like all brand new vinyl. And so it's clearly a lot more people than 12, I guess is maybe the best way to define it.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about the growth. So when you started with 12, how quickly was it 30,000, know, and what was that journey like, figuring out how to scale and grow and manage the inventory?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. And I think the best way to kind of caveat all of this is like, despite studying entrepreneurship, despite studying the music business, there was so much that I didn't know. Right. And so it was kind of like whatever plan we had was not really going to come to fruition. And we kind of knew that intuitively. So we almost, don't tell Dr. Cornwall this, but we didn't really spend time making a plan. We kind of just did it. And for us, it was like, at the same time, we didn't have expectations, right? Like I had a full-time job. I wasn't expecting this to be something that could, pay me a salary or, eventually provide for a family, let alone employees or whatever. And it was purely like, we were doing it for the love, and we were doing it for the love of music and just the desire to share great music with great people around the world. And so that first month, I think we had about 12 customers. We grew pretty slowly by the end of that first year. I think we had like 300 members, if I'm not mistaken. And it was all manuals, all nights and weekends. My co-founder and I, like, we'd go do our day jobs and we'd come home and we'd pack and ship records. Every record we were like hand wrapping and writing thank you notes. And I remember telling Dr. C about it, and he was like, "Yeah, I don't think that's scalable." And I was like, "It's definitely not scalable."
Definitely
And
not.
I actually hate it. It was like a labor of love. And then I think by the second year is when things really started to take off, and there was a couple like key inflection points there. But the net was like, we ended that first year at about 300 subscribers. The next year we ended at about 5,000 subscribers, still doing it all ourselves. We were totally bootstrapped, no outside funding. Every dollar that was coming in was basically funding the entire operation. It wasn't until about 18 months in that we actually like quit our jobs and made it a full-time thing, started paying ourselves like a menial salary. I forget what the numbers were kind of in the following years after that, but we ended up bootstrapping ourselves for like 5 years in total. We got to about it's about $11 million in gross revenue, about break even, kind of a small net profit on that. And I think that point was probably like the 10 to 12,000 subscribers, if I'm not mistaken. And that was 5 years in, right? So it seems pretty quick, but when you like count the individual days and the number of records that we had to actually ship to get there, it's like, it's a lot. It's a lot of time. And so, now I think we're 9.5, our 10-year anniversary is next January. So we're like pretty deep into this thing, and we're just getting to a point where, things are, I won't say it's easy because it's never easy, but it's like, there are certain things that are automatic that just used to be the biggest barriers to us and the biggest time sucks, in the earlier days. So yeah, it feels like overnight in some ways, but it also feels like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
I want to hit on something you said a minute ago about bootstrapping and funding. A lot of times young entrepreneurs, and I say young as in the stage of their entrepreneurial journey, not necessarily their age, but they start out with an idea and immediately they say, I've got to raise money, or I need someone to give me money so that I can actually go do this. You did the complete opposite. You said with maxing out your credit card and with bootstrapping it for so many years. And, obviously that model doesn't work with every different business or every idea, but I would just love to hear your general thoughts on bootstrapping and some practical tools for how to do that effectively.
Yeah. I think general thoughts. I've sort of lived both lives, right? Like we bootstrapped for a really long time, and then we raised, what was effectively like venture capital. I think, I have a really hard time saying that one is better than the other, and that you should only do one or only do the other, because I think they both have a time and a place, right? I think what was really great about bootstrapping ourselves for so long is we were able to maintain integrity around our mission and sort of the why and what we were doing, which is, it sounds a bit cheeky, but when you look at like record of the month clubs and sort of why they've failed in the past, because we're certainly not the first, right? But we're by far, I think, one of the most successful, kind of longest tenured in many different ways. And those models, they were just like, they were cash grabs, right? Like it was just like labels trying to like shell off dead inventory that they couldn't sell otherwise, right? So there was a very objective and somewhat like, it was just a polluted like perspective that they brought to it, right? And for us, it was like, no, we genuinely want to share great music with great people, and that's why we're here. Like it was like a for us by us mentality. And I don't know that would have been able to remain true had we raised money earlier. And in part because when we did raise money, it all changed. Like the experience became less about sort of the mission and less about sort of the kind of the rationale for doing things from an essence or a kind of a why perspective, and more about like, we started to really focus on our numbers, and we started to really focus on our spend. We started to really focus on growing our team and driving as much revenue growth, because that's the game that you have to play. Like people don't invest in something if they're not trying to get a return, and often that return that they're hoping to get is like either 0 or 10x, right? So it's like, it's better for them if you fail than it is if you have like a moderate level of success. And that just puts a totally different pressure on your business. So I think there's that, right? And I think when I talk to entrepreneurs today, I think there are some people that are really apt and eager to raise money because they think that's what they should do, right? And I it's not that it's wrong, but for me, I'm kind of like, well, do you have to? Like, what's possible if you don't? And is there a way that you can incubate this idea and get it to a place where it's defined and the identity is is established so that when you do raise money, you don't have to like give up your soul for it, And I think that was really special about when we raised money. We only ended up selling about 15% of the company. So like we still had control, we still had majority, we still had all the, and people were buying into it because they thought it was compelling and they were excited about the mission and they saw the product and the brand and what it could become and all that. So like we'd already proven ourselves to some degree, and they were just like, here's more money to go do more of what you're already doing. And I think that it just, I don't know, maybe it's my personality type with that stuff and like, some relationship that I have with authority. But I think when people raise money, it just changes the game so quickly. But at the flip side, like you need capital, right? You need to invest, you need to be able to grow, whatever. I think from a tactical standpoint, like if you're going to bootstrap, like you have to have like a product that you're selling, you have to have some income. It's got to have a margin that can be sustainable. You kind of have to be prepared to invest heavily before you're actually able to take anything out, whether it be a salary or what have you. So I think side hustles, like bootstrap the crap out of that stuff. And once it gets to a point where it's like big enough and there's a big opportunity, then look at funding or look at debt or look at, a myriad of, there's so many more funding options now than there was even when we raised our round in 2018. You don't need to like change who you are, to raise money, you know what I mean? And I think that's one of the best parts of bootstrapping at some point, but it comes with its cost, right? Like I didn't take a salary from VMP for 18 months. And then when I did, I basically cut my salary in a third. But now I have like the utmost control and freedom over my life, right? So I can do whatever I want next, which is, when you talk about wealth, it's like not always the financial figures. It's like the freedom to just invest your time where you want to.
Absolutely. So looking, 30,000 foot view, we could say you started with this great idea. It's a passion. It's music. You love it. You had 12 subscribers at first, and then you got, subscribers all around the world. And it's just this easy uphill climb, and entrepreneurship is so much fun, but we know that's not how it goes. I'm sure it's up and down and up and down. I'd like to hear a little bit about some of those valleys for you and what, day to day, or what some of those challenges have been over the last nearly 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really important question, because I think there's a fallacy of like looking at me or looking at anybody else that you would, quote unquote, consider successful and just assuming that it was a linear path, which is not reality. Like you think about when you learned to ride a bike, you had to fall 100 times before you actually figured out how to balance on it. And even then it didn't guarantee success. And so, it is definitely a series of loops and sort of peaks and valleys and doubling back and U-turns and like near death experiences and all that. And we've had our fair share of those for sure. A couple that come to mind, it was, I can't remember when it was. It was like 2015 maybe. So a couple of years in, and we were like mid-teens in terms of thousands of subscribers. And, no, this is the third year, because 2000, whatever, that second year we ended with 5,000 is when we started to grow like exponentially year over year or month over month. And so we had run into several different occasions where we didn't have control over the supply chain. So we would get things late, which as a record of the month club, if you don't have a record in a month, then what are you? You know what I mean? And so when we got product late, it was a nightmare from a customer service standpoint. And so to correct for it, albeit ignorantly, is we started ordering well in advance to ensure things would get there in time, but we'd have to forecast our growth, and we weren't necessarily assuming the same growth rate, certainly a discounted one, but it got to a point where the growth rate that we had assumed was much more aggressive than what reality ended up being. And mind you, we're buying tens of thousands of units of a specific thing that we're not going to ship for 6, 7, 8 months. So if you miss in 1 month, then it becomes this compounding effect over time where like the misses just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we got to a point at the end of that year where I think we had ordered like 20,000 records, and we only needed to fulfill our demand like 14,000. So you figure roughly $10,000 or $10 a unit, like there's 60 grand that's just tied up in dead inventory from that month, not to mention, the prior months that were also consumed in dead inventory too. And so it put a real burden on our cash flow and just our ability to like certainly grow and invest in marketing, but then also be like, can we actually meet our payroll? And I was just, I remember feeling like such an idiot, because I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, if this is what kills this business, like I'm an idiot. I'm like, I want to swear, but I can't swear, or I won't swear. I won't do it. I promise. It's like, what good am I if like this is the reason why this business goes out of, you just have to like walk away from it. And so it was like a car wreck that was happening in slow motion, right? So like every day was like a death march. I'd walk into our office and like, can't spend any more money on marketing, can't send any more emails, can't like make things happen any faster. And yet it's just continuing to happen. Right. And, I was probably in this like state of lethargy for 30 days more than probably. And I was just like, it was clearly affecting the team. And I remember somebody on our team pulled me aside one day. I was like, hey man, I get this is really hard. And I don't know exactly what the solution is or what the way through it is yet, but you need to recognize that the way that you're showing up and sort of the emotional energy that you're bringing to the team is affecting everybody, and it's going to create a very specific outcome, which is probably what you fear the most, right? And it was just like, for me, it was that light bulb moment where it's like, from a leadership standpoint, like, oh my goodness, like, oh, how I show up, the demeanor that I have, the perspective that I have, sort of my ability to recognize a problem, to carry with it, some legitimacy as to what it is and where it's coming from, but then also the kind of that hopeless optimism that kind of, is the foundation for so many entrepreneurs, is to like, we're going to get through it. Right. Like it was such a light bulb moment for me where I couldn't, emotionally, it was definitely a valley for the business. It was definitely a valley because it was very existential in terms of like, are we going to make it to the next month? But when I look back now, it was such an important learning for us that like from that moment or from that experience came so many changes to our operation, came this desire to get more involved in our supply chain, came this desire to and like it put more financial rigor and more controls in our processing standpoints. It came like, let's look at the data. Let's see how we're selling things. Let's integrate new features. Let's find new ways to kind of move this excess inventory that, some of those things, certainly VNP would not exist today if we didn't do that. But at the same time, like it wouldn't be as big as it is today if we didn't make some of the changes that came from those types of experiences. So that's just one that comes to mind, but there's so many more. Just like that, if not even worse.
Yeah, I say every entrepreneur needs guts, grit, and good people. You have to have the guts to make the leap and the grit to keep going, and be surrounded by good people. It sounds like you've got a good team and, at least one person who could call you out and walk you through all of that. Grit to kind of have gotten through the last 10 years and all the different challenges that have come along the way. One thing that I see that holds young entrepreneurs back is just the fear. And I'd like to hear from you how you use fear, because everyone's got it. And anytime you're stepping out and doing something new or putting yourself out there or your idea out there, of course, there's going to be a level of fear. How do you use fear to propel you forward rather than as something that you're going to crumble under?
Yeah. I feel like I'm giving 20-minute answers to all these questions, but they're really good questions and there's a lot of meat to them. I think so. Fear, I'll tell you how fear affected me. And then I'll tell you kind of, and this is a work in progress, right? Like how I'm trying to do what you say in terms of allowing fear to kind of propel me forward. For as long as I can remember, my greatest fear is not having a place, not fitting in, being forgotten, whatever, like just not feeling like I'm worth people's time and attention and love or whatever it might be defined as. And that, like everything else, like those are things that happened very early in my life that have nothing really objectively to do with VNP, but yet they show up every day. And really how that manifested itself within VNP and even, broadly speaking from an entrepreneurial standpoint is really around this idea of vision And for a long time, vision was a concept that I didn't fully understand, because for me, I was like, what good is it to just sort of like pontificate on sort of a thing that could be true in the future, if only, all this stuff is to go right. And for me, I'm such a with my hands person, right? Like I prefer to be more objective when I think about vision, and really kind of thinking about like not necessarily what could the work look like or what could the world look like, but if that were to be true, then what would we need to do to get there? What's the bridge between the reality and sort of the future? And being the CEO, it's like you kind of need to. One of your primary jobs is maintaining and sort of preaching that vision, right? But that was always an uncomfortable place for me, because I didn't know what it meant. One, and then two, I was so afraid of losing people and ultimately being forgotten or not having a place in my own company. If I were to put a vision out there that people just thought was dumb or didn't agree with or didn't see the value in, or what have you. And so, there was this, and it was kind of easy to hide from that in the early days, because there was so much happening within the business, right? It's always a firefight. There's always an emergency. There's always a thing that you need to like work on for one reason or another, which makes it really easy to sort of like be like, oh yeah, our vision is like, we just need to get through this thing. And if we get through that thing, then we can really talk about vision, And so that was like sort of my mode of operation for a really long time. But then we got to a place where, our team had grown considerably. There was my role changed from sort of a jack of all trades, like doing, managing, kind of like have my hands in everything, to really having to be the steward of that vision and sort of align the people around it and sort of make decisions within that context. And so I had to like have a vision. And when I didn't, I mean, it's not that I didn't have one. It's not that I didn't know what to do, but I was so afraid to put it out there, because I was like, well, what if this person wants
to be vulnerable?
Yeah. It's like, oh God, it was paralyzing. And so what I would do is I'd be like, well, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? Okay. Yeah. Let's just do a verse. And I can go with the flow. That sounds great. Like if it will keep me safe and it will keep me sort of keep my place secure, then yeah, great. Sure. And that was really bad, really bad. Because what it ended up doing is we had a team of like 20 CEOs, and we had a team of like people that were operating in silos, and they each had their own vision that was maybe loosely connected to what we were ultimately trying to accomplish, but not really with any sort of tangibility, right? And so then it becomes really hard to collaborate and to troubleshoot and to break down those silos, because the marketing is kind of operating off this thing, and then the product is operating off this thing, and the supply chain is operating. It's not that they were totally off base and nobody wanted to go like, I don't know, start a construction company or anything like that, but at the same time, it's like even just like a couple of degrees of separation can create a lot of challenge as it relates to organizing people. And that was one, and then it got to a point where I could not. I was so paralyzed by the fear. I was so afraid of all of the things, or just being kind of outcasted, that is like my buddy said. He's like, what you're afraid of is going to come true. And that's exactly what happened, where I got to a point where I was paralyzed. It was so like fragmented, disorienting and everything. And I was like, I'm at a place where like mentally and emotionally I'm tapped. Like I don't know I don't even know how to work myself out of this anymore. So like I've got to step back and I've got to give myself some freedom to focus on myself. But then I also need to like put somebody in place that can really set a vision and drive it forward and align the team around it, which ultimately kind of been the basis of my transition into more of a strategic role than operator. So all of that being said, like that's a somewhat new revelation, right? Like that's only after I've been able to take myself out of the whirlwind have I been able to think about that with that level of detail. And I see it come up every day, basically, for me. And I start to get really comfortable where it's like, I'll have conversations with myself where I'm like, dude, you're just being scared. You're just being scared. You just want some people to like you. You just want to have friends. You just want a place to be and belong and all that. And, at the same time, it's like, I don't know that there's ever because that's like the 3-year-old in me. Right. And like, I love that version of myself dearly. And it's always going to exist. Like the work is not to like forget or to deny or to push it down or whatever, but it's kind of like, it's to hold it in balance with like that. What if, but like, yeah, what if what if you could operate without that fear? Or what if you could like hold that fear and cherish it and have some respect for it, but at the same time still like just move it aside so that you can walk past it, right? And that's where I think that's where the magic happens. And for me, it comes with that awareness of what's at play and sort of the mental sort of voice that's on loop in my mind, and then just the decision to go forward anyways, and so that for me recently has unlocked a ton of creative energy. It's unlocked a ton of just like authority, not necessarily from like a power dynamic, but just like an agency. Like I have agency. I have the ability to sort of set a vision, to act against that vision, to move forward with that vision in mind. And it can be for anything. It can be for my family. It can be for myself. It could be for other projects that I'm working on, or sort of roles that I'm playing within those projects, or whatever it might be. It's just being able to like sort of think about what is that reality, or what do I hope that reality looks like or could look like, and then how do I start to move towards that? And it's way more vulnerable. And again, I could be the weirdo in the room here. Maybe else could be listening to this and be like, this guy is a softie, which is totally true. My dad used to tell me that I would cry at the drop of a hat, which was totally true. I would cry at and I still do to a large degree. But like those are the things that just play on loop in my mind, right? And so those are the ways in which fear holds me back. And some of it's like it's a fear of being outcast, which creates this perfectionism, which creates this like failure to even start, and it's a bad cycle to be in, right? So if you can find a way to just harness it but then move past it, like it's a much better world out there.
It's like being an entrepreneur is the best and the worst thing for you, Matt.
I mean, it's the best education I've ever gotten in my life. Yeah. Like, I love my time at Belmont, but I learned a hell of a lot more building a company than I did in a classroom, right?
Well, sure.
It brings it out of you, right? It's not just about the nuts and bolts of building a financial model or marketing plan or whatever. But I think what entrepreneurship does is it forces you to like reckon with your demons, right? And it forces you to look in the mirror, and at the same time, like still like invoke change in the world, right? And that's really hard to do. And sports is another example, but like it doesn't always come to fruition in that way. It's not, life or death. It's not dependent upon your income's not dependent upon that stuff all the time and whatnot. So, yeah.
With entrepreneurship, or with this idea, it's not just a job, it's your heart, and that's, you touched on that so much, where it's like this fear and this vulnerability and this, you got to go out there and it's risky. How are they going to respond to it? Because it matters so much to you. And through that whole process, there's so much maturing that happens when you face your fears, or when you try something and it works or it doesn't work, and how you pivot and grow. There's so much noise in the world today. And I think we are all addicted to our phones, addicted to Netflix, addicted to busyness. Even if you take out technology, like, it's almost like a bragging point to say how busy you are and how overscheduled you are. And certainly as an entrepreneur, your job is 24/7. It's easy to get sucked into that even more so. But I have found that the people that really succeed, and success, not just as a financial measure, but success as a person and as a leader and as an employer, you have to be so grounded and centered, not just with your own mission and vision, but also with your own self. And I know that's what you were talking about that a lot over the last few minutes. What are some ways that you have learned to stay grounded, or to find time to spend the time in silence, or coming back to yourself, or, to brainstorm? You have to have time to sit and be creative. So tell us a little bit about that journey for you and what that looks like and those practices for you.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to give a really long answer, but you're totally right. I mean, it's like when you have kids, right? Like everything changes, and you learn so much about yourself. You learn so much more about the world and all that. And that there's, again, this might not be true for everybody, but for me, it was especially true. There's a tendency to like to assume that the right thing to do is to be selfless, right? And to like the nth degree. It's like everybody else before me. It's a very servitude, model, right? And that's the trap that I fell into. And even, as VMP grew and we hired more people, it was like, well, there's all of our customers, there's all of our employees. At some point, there was all of our investors, there's all of our team members, there's all of my family, there's all of their families, there's all of the whatever. And then at the very bottom of that is me, right? And so like it became very easy for me to forget myself and lose myself in sort of the macro. And I remember somebody being like, "What do you want?" And I'm like, what do you mean what I want? And they're like, "No, what do you want? Like, what do you want from this, out of this experience?" And I was like, I was worried. I had no answer because I'd never thought about it. One, and two, I was like, I have no right to answer that question. You know what I mean? And that was a really bad place. I would not recommend getting there. And in part, like, that's just the way that my mind and my body works. Of like, if I'm vested in something, like I'm going to be vested in it, and the best versions of myself come out when I'm like emotionally vested into something. But it's also where I tend to lose myself, and it's where I tend to sort of get mired in the everybody else and lose track of my sense of self and my wants and desires and motivations and all that. And I'll start doing things because I think other people want me to be who knows what it is. And so again, this is a new thing where I've started to, and part of what I've wanted to spend this like quasi sabbatical time is being like, who am I? What do I want? What gifts do I bring to the world? Like, what have I been brought here to do? And then how do I bring that person to the table, authentically and with some confidence and with some like clear vision? And how do I line my life around that? And what does it look like to do that? And it's hard for me to have, I think some of the objective things is like, one, I need to be physically active, right? So I've always been a runner, but I've really picked up my running recently to the point where I'm training for an ultra marathon in the summer. Yeah.
I know you just did a marathon last year, right?
I did, yeah. And now I was like, oh, that was fun.
You got the bug. You got the bug. Wow.
I don't know. I don't get it. It's even for me, I'm like, this makes no sense whatsoever. But I'm having a blast.
Yeah.
It's been like, I don't know, 10 hours a week running. And it's like, really, it's the only 10 hours a week that I don't have somebody else in my ears or in my head or whatever. So, and it's a way for me to be outside and to be in nature and just like almost like a form of exploration. Like one of my favorite things to do is just show up at a trailhead, know that I need to run like 8 or 9 miles and being like, I guess I'll just figure it out. Like I have no idea where I'm going, and just being thrown into the deep end like that. I love it so much. And I always come back from a run just like creatively, like refilled, emotionally refilled, physically like strong and confident and all that. So that's one thing. I've also realized that I need some sort of like objective project to work on. I think was it Peter Drucker that talks a lot about the transition from like factory workers to knowledge workers. And it's so true. Like as a knowledge worker, like so much of the activity happens up here that it's really easy to like sort of feel like you've done something when in reality you've just been thinking about something or feeling something for a really long time. And so I need like something to like be able to make and build and sort of use my hands in a very objective context where I can see like start to finish, like, oh, here's progress, right? Like here's visual progress. And so that's where like home renovation projects that I'm not at all qualified for have been. I guess now that I realize it, I have a tendency to throw myself into the deep end. And
are you just taking a sledgehammer to the walls in your house?
Somebody told me that one time, the conditions at which you survive become the conditions at which your survival is dependent upon. So it's just funny to be like, oh man, I'm just recreating sort of these like deep end experiences
yes.
over and over.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and so and even that was true. Like what I was saying about vision, it's like, oh, I was really good at managing chaos. So like either subconsciously or consciously, just manufacture chaos and I'm good, right? Like I have a place. But when you get to like a place of stability, I didn't know what to do. So that's one thing. I also like reading is a big thing for me, specifically reading memoirs. I just love, I love like the fear of not being worthy or not belonging or whatever is kind of assuaged when I'm reading a book, because I'm like, oh, thank God, like they're an idiot too. Like they didn't know, like, and I'm talking like Phil Knight. It's like SHOUTOUT is one of the greatest books of all time, as far as I'm considered. And there's so many different points where you're like, you're a freaking idiot, man. Like that's not at all what you are supposed to do. But I totally get it.
My husband just finished that book, and there were so many nights over the last month where I would be asleep, and he'd, be like, "Oh my gosh, I got to tell you this thing that I just read."
It's incredible.
Like, turn the lights off.
I love that book.
Yeah, it's a great book. What are some of your other favorite books?
There's a book called Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, which for me it was pretty life-changing. He's a very, from the outside looking in, he's a very sort of just like masochistic approach to life, where it's like, just muscle up and do it. But his book, like he's super vulnerable, and there's a lot of emotion in it. And what I appreciate most, or what it helped me realize, is like sort of the effects of the victim mentality and sort of the weight that puts on a life. And sort of like the lack of agency that you carry when you walk around with a victim mentality, right? And so being able to just like almost say screw that and be like, I'm here, and I'm real, and I'm gonna do it, and here's why, and just being able to show up, I think is a really important lesson that I've learned from that book. What else? I just finished 4,000 Weeks, which was actually like a really it's like a book about time management, but it's not objectively about time management. It kind of dances around this idea of like time in the grand scheme of life. Like, what is time, right? And what does it look like to live a meaningful life outside of your calendar, outside of your, goals, aspirations, whatever? Like, how do we reckon with the fact that we're only around for a very limited time as individuals, right? So that book, I thought, was actually surprisingly, I didn't expect much going into it, but I was surprisingly pleased by it.
Okay, it's interesting you mentioned the whole victim mentality. I think that's one of the biggest challenges this next generation has, just what I see in our culture, that I think we've got to really wrestle with and grapple with. Another thing is, I touched on just like the constant noise. And one thing that's so interesting to me is, in this era where everything is at our fingertips, streaming, email, social media, like everything, we get it in an instant. You launched and developed Vinyl Me Please, which you've got to wait for it. And there's an element where the customer doesn't really control it necessarily. I know, like, you guys pick the records, but yet it's blown up, and you see customers all around the world. Just talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing with the trends in consumer behavior, or specifically music. Vinyl, it's like streaming's blowing up, but yet people are really loving vinyl right now, and the physical aspect of it. This is a very broad question, but I'd love some of your general insights, or some things that you're kind of seeing within all of that.
Yeah, I'll do that. Before I do, are you drinking? Do you have a kombucha there? What is that?
It's so great that you asked, Matt. I do. Let me pop it open for you. This is our shout out of the week, Walker Brothers. Every week we do a shout out of another Belmont business. And this one is one of my current favorites, Walker Brothers Kombucha. It was started by two brothers, one of which, Sam, went to Belmont. I think he was also a music business major. But they've used their family SCOBY to create this amazing kombucha. They have so many different flavors. Some of it's high gravity, some of it's not. They're sold all over Nashville, including in one of our student-run businesses on campus. But I love Walker Brothers. So big shout out to Sam Walker. If you want some, check it out at drinkwalkerbrothers.com.
I'm so jealous. I want one of those right now, because I think I had one when I was with you last time in Nashville, and it was so good. And I'm a huge kombucha fan. It's gross how much kombucha I drink.
People love it or hate it, but I love it. And
the people that hate it, I'm like, what's wrong with you?
I'm like, but try it. But
yeah.
Let
me tell you. Here's like 4 that you can try that you might like.
Please. Walker Brothers is awesome, and it's all over town. So we're proud of Sam. It's awesome.
Yeah. So your question. So I think one of the things that we stumbled on as it relates to VMP is kind of this idea of like, what is a human experience? You know what I mean? And kind of wrestling with the fact that like society writ large, and in part because we're in the midst of a technological revolution, is asking us to trade human experiences for convenience, right? And it includes going to the grocery store. It includes how you shop. It includes how you consume media. It includes how you decide what you're gonna do. Like to the nth degree, technology has exists to like make our lives more convenient, right? And that's what so many people are doing inside of the tech world too. But at the same time, there's like when you have a human experience, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so great. Like I love it when we can get together and like go and have dinner with our friends and we're there for like 3 hours and we're just talking and we're just looking each other in the eye and eating a meal. It's like we don't even care about what the food is. We don't care how much it costs. And we'll pay 10 times what we would have paid probably just because
we're so hungry for it.
Yeah. And particularly when we all went into quarantine with COVID, it's like so much of that got lost. But also let me rephrase. So much of convenience was sort of forgotten because all of a sudden we had so much more time and we were like, well, what am I going to spend time doing? Well, I guess I'll find some inconvenient things to focus on. And so our business actually, like, we had no idea what to expect going into COVID, but it was like a rocket ship for us. And really, I mean, it has become sort of the premise or the thesis for VMP now, where it's like the world is asking us to trade these human experiences for digital convenience. And like, there's a time and a place for that, but it's not every moment of every single day. And music being something that, has the power to like just hit you like a ton of bricks, like in the soul, in the heart, in the feelings, like it doesn't make sense. Like, why would you not have a human experience wrapped up in that type of format, right? And that's even like why vinyl, right? Like it just sounds better. It's not really a valid argument. Like, yeah, there's a different sound to it, but it's really the fact that like we could sit here and I could show you all these records and I could tell you stories about, oh yeah, I heard about this band, I saw them or whatever. And like, I'm not going to do that scrolling through what I listen to on Spotify. Like, it doesn't matter. Or nobody ever says, do you want to come over and listen to this playlist that I made? Or, I'll put on my Spotify weekly and we can compare. Like, it doesn't exist, or it doesn't make sense. It's not human. And so I think, despite the fact that like technology is going to continue to evolve and things like AI and VR and all that stuff is like going to continue to like transform the way in which we interact with the world, there's always going to be a place for like a human experience. Somebody's always going to want to go and spend 3 hours at a restaurant with their best friends, and they're always going to pay a premium for that. And it's who we are, right? Like you can't change the chemistry of human beings unless you make us a robot, which maybe it will happen. Hopefully not anytime soon.
We're working on it.
Yeah. And so that's, I don't know. Those are all draft thoughts, right? Like I'm totally open to being wrong. But that's just what we've seen and what we've experienced. And the trend within vinyl and the success of VMP, like you could look at any other industry where there's kind of this like analog previous and digital new, and like the analog is still killing it. Like look at physical books, like it's still killing it. There's still a market for it. So I don't know. I firmly believe that as humans, we're always going to have the desire for these tangible sort of physical experiences.
Yeah. Well, what is your role today with Vinyl Me Please, and what else are you working on?
Yeah. So, I still own a large chunk of the company. I'm out of the day-to-day, which has been great. And I'm on the board of directors. I'm technically the chairman of the board. So my involvement is really at the strategic level and kind of thinking about like, obviously like looking at the performance of the business, but just like looking at that and then putting it aside and being like, okay, so what else do we want to do? Where else do we want to go? How else can we bring this mission to life? What are the other kind of like opportunities? And then also risks and challenges and, whatever. And then how do we assess? How do we make decisions in and around that stuff? How do we finance it? How do we fund it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is kind of a shift, which, a lot of entrepreneurs, it hits you like a ton of bricks when you get to it. You can't really anticipate it, but you move from an operator to an owner. It's a very different, it's like when you move to like an individual contributor to a manager, like that's a hard leap in and of itself. But imagine like owning the thing and then having to entrust other people to like do with it what you will. It's frightening.
Tell me about your consulting business.
Oh yeah. So about a year ago, I launched a consultancy with a guy that I've known for a while. And he was leaving Nike. He was there for about 15 years, around the same time that I was leaving BNP. And we realized that we've learned so much in both of our experiences that are very entrepreneurial in very different contexts, that it'd be great if we could bring that to other people. And so we formed a consultancy. Really what we do, it's kind of hard to explain, but there's like major corporations that are like billions of dollars in revenue that are established, have, brands that are basically household names, but there's a certain perception as to who they are, what they do, and what they can do. That when they have like internal departments that are focused on innovation, but it doesn't make any sense for them to like actually staff that beyond a couple of different people, right? So even if they come across an opportunity like, oh, it's interesting, what if we like build something there? They don't have the resources and the capabilities to do that. So we come alongside and we're like, we'll be your quote unquote build partner in a way, like you're co-founder of this idea. We'll help you incubate it. We'll help you bring it to market, develop the brand identity, the marketing strategy, launch it, grow it, scale it, and then you can ultimately reabsorb it or, whatever. So, it's been it forces, like what I've had to learn is like the process of starting something over and over and over and over again, which is super fun as it relates to being like an entrepreneur. But then it's also, it's very much like, how do you create that hook? How do you create that thing that's going to pull people in? How do you get your first customer? How do you turn that into 10 customers? How do you turn that into 100 customers, and so on and so forth? And those are some of the challenges that I really love, just like getting into the thick of. So that's what I've been doing. I've also been advising. I'm an advisor of actually one company from a Belmont grad, and a couple other companies as well. And just in a way, like commiserating and just helping, like, I don't know, trying to use my experience to help them realize that what they're going through is not unique and it's normal, and trying to help them see a path or find a path through. And that's been really life-giving. And, like I said, I've been running a ton too. So that's what I've been up to lately.
That's so awesome. Well, before I let you go, I know I'm using up all your time today.
All good.
I do have some rapid fire questions.
Let's go. Lay it on me.
Okay. Mountains or the beach?
Beach.
Really? I thought you would say mountains.
I love the mountains, but I'm a water guy. There's no mountain, or there's not much water in Denver.
No, not.
No, not a lot.
Gotta go. This is not fast. See, I always get distracted.
Prompt conversation. It's good.
I know. What's the last song that you listened to?
So I'm reading Will Smith's memoir, and he's talking about.
It's very timely right now.
Yeah, for better, for worse, I think. He's talking about the formation of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the show, but before that, he was Fresh Prince, the rapper, with DJ Jazzy Jeff, and he's talking about all these songs, and I've never really listened to their music. So I think the last song I listened to was "Girls Are Nothing But Problems." Fresh Prince and DJ Jazzy Jeff.
That is awesome. What's your favorite album? Do you have a favorite album?
I have a few. Yeah. One of my go-to though, whenever I'm just like needing to reconnect with myself, is this album called The Bastards of the Beat by a band called The Damnwells. It's like super rough around the edges. It was recorded in like a storage facility in Brooklyn in like the early 2000s. And I mean, you can hear random noises in the background, but those songs, I found that record at like such a formative time in my life that they still, every time I hear them, there's some songs that I still end up crying.
Yes. Yes. Oh, it's always like the albums that you listen to when you got your car, when you were 16. It's like,
that's probably one
ever top those, what you just listen to on repeat in the car. Okay. Yep. Guilty pleasure snack.
Guilty pleasure snack. I am a potato chip connoisseur, and chips and salsa are my jam. I remember my mom at Sam's Club, she'll kill me if she hears this. She would buy like the extra, extra, extra large of Lay's potato chips, and she would come home and she would just munch. It was like, it'd be gone in like a day. And I just, I can't eat like those chips, but I love like kettle cooked. I love tortilla chips. So like Mexican restaurants, like you can usually find me at a Mexican restaurant.
So good.
Yeah. So that's probably my guilty pleasure.
Desert Island book.
Desert Island book. SHOUTOUT is definitely one of them. Probably That Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. The book, The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Oh yeah.
Has always been. That was one of those books where I was like, oh.
2005.
Yeah. The movie sucked. I did not like the movie, but the book is.
Because the book was so good. You just can't. Yep.
For like and I'm sure like younger generations now would really resonate with it because it just makes you, it just reminds you that you have a place and that you're worth something, even if you're a little weird or different or whatever.
Yeah. What is VMP's highest selling record?
For a long time it was Gorilla's Demon Days. I think history, we've sold 40,000 copies of that record. We like sold out in a second when we launched that record too. Yeah. What other ones? We've sold a lot of Fiona Apple's Title, which was their debut album. We did the first ever vinyl pressing, and I think we had exclusive rights. Maybe still have exclusive rights for it. We did a ton of Mariah Carey's I think it was her Daydream record. Like that just sold like bananas. And people were just like, people would buy multiple copies because they're like, I want one in case my basement floods.
Yes.
Okay. So those are a few that come to mind. I don't remember those stats. I don't know that we have a number one all time.
Okay, last question. Your best dad joke. You gotta have one.
I did. Well, I don't know that it's a joke, but hey, Elizabeth, guess what?
What?
Chicken butt. I say that to my kids. I've got 3 kids. They're 6 and under, and they roll on their. And now what they start doing is they go, banana, or porcupine. So it's like I say, guess what? And I don't know. You basically can pull out the dictionary for the possible responses now.
My dad just taught my oldest this joke. Hey, Matt, someone at your school said you look like an owl.
I do?
No!
Oh. Oh, who?
Who? Yes.
Yeah. Got it.
We're getting that one a lot at our house.
Yeah. Well, try the guess what, and then your kids are going to bring it to their school, and then all of a sudden the parents are going to be like, who's the idiot that taught my kid this guess what chicken butt thing? Like,
oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
But they're also better off for it, so.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was so fun having you on the podcast today. And on behalf of all of Belmont, we just love what you're doing. We can't wait to see where you go next. Big fans of Matt Fiedler. So congrats, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, likewise. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Thanks for listening. What If is produced by Old Soul. For links and show notes, please visit belmontetp.com/whatif. Until next time, keep asking what if.